Hey everyone, I'm Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate demo for the piece I call Let's Make a Deal. I was going to do a Joker voice and then I thought, no, let's not do that. So since this is very line driven, the idea here was to keep sort of like the bells and whistles down a bit. So let's talk about those decisions kind of as we get there and why I made them. So first we're going to start with the kind of gesture drawing exploration phase. You can see here that it was originally done in portrait. I kind of did this line, I kind of had this swoopy body, and actually right before I put that nose on there, this wasn't going to be Joker. I was just kind of doodling, and then I was like, let's make it Joker. I don't know why, I just kind of felt like it. I like drawing Joker really over the top in general, and so here I kind of went with like a Beetlejuice teeth and like a big nose, kind of like Ivan from Giant Robo, and that's kind of the start of the entire thing. Once I had this pose down and I converted it to being a landscape piece, the idea here was to keep these lines of action pretty clear. So he's going to carry that arched back where it looks like his hips are kind of what's driving him forward. His gun is straight out, his elbow is locked because he just shot at someone, and now he's got that kind of like nonchalant thing, and that's why his hand is his other hand, the hand not holding the gun, is like that. So the idea is he's kind of walking towards the person who he just shot and saying, let's make a deal. So like, you don't know exactly what the story is behind this, but you know that there's probably someone on the receiving end of that who's about to not get the best deal made. That was the principle behind the entire thing. As for the lines here, they're drawn with the fat pencil. The rough sketch is drawn with the fat pencil, and the lines are drawn with the fat pencil. We just basically take the fat pencil and make it a little fatter and messier to get those initial gestures done. And then when we're coming in here and we're trying to craft these lines in this very specific way, we make that pencil a lot tighter, we get a lot more precise, and we're really concerned at that point about hitting specific choices with like thick and thin lines. Make my choices as to what is thick and what is thin pretty intuitively. There's not a lot of this that I can really transfer to people unless we were talking about real specific lines, like why this and why that. There are areas where of course you taper a line off because the topology of that surface would create less of a shadow there, less of a definition, and then there are other areas where I'm making something thick simply for the design purpose of I want to outline this thing more, I want to make this stronger and more bold. So that's kind of like where you get some of the logic there, is that a lot of it is kind of situation by situation. You can also see that I deliberately didn't finish his hairline. I wanted that to be a fade from like the get-go. So he's got like, not really a high and tight, it's more like a high and loose, I guess. He's got this big plume of hair on top, and then it very quickly fades to just skin. And then the rest of him is pretty put together and crisp. This is kind of the way I like to see the Joker. I don't really like the versions where he's like disheveled and crazy and all that. I like the ones where he's got like a crisp suit on. The only thing that I made a very conscious decision to leave out in this one was his flower. That's a pretty key aspect of the Joker, but I didn't want to put it in because it would be on the left side, and that's the side that's like facing us, and I didn't want more noise there. I wanted to keep his cleanliness, and I feel like if I were going to put a flower there, it would start adding just some more bullshit kind of in that area. I mean, Joker doesn't, I guess, always have to have that, but I personally feel like that's always a key aspect of him, but I decided to deliberately leave it out for read and style issues with the character. So at this point, we're essentially just going through and putting in the final lines. There's a lot of information in the original sketch for the parts you see me drawing right now. The parts that don't have a lot of information are his hands. So what you see me throwing in right there is a new layer with a lowered opacity. Well, actually, it's not lowered yet. I think I lowered in a second. At 12 at midnight, I decided to note that this was really late, I guess, when I decided to do this. So I'm throwing in this extra layer because it's like, okay, I did not give myself enough information to finalize these hands. Let's go ahead and do that right now. So that's what that section is. Just go in, new layer, doodle in, get some more definition in there. You can see here on this other hand, I didn't like the way that initial redoodling was, so I went in and added a little bit more. I liked the idea of these kind of like driver's gloves as well. It's kind of a different take than the usual kind of more like vaudeville style gloves that Joker oftentimes has. This was also a good opportunity to just try to mix up, find some other little interesting ways that I could do something slightly different with Joker. So he's got like slightly longer fingernails in this iteration of him. The Joker is so fun to draw. I mean, I don't have to tell you that. The most fun thing about something like the Joker or Batman or Mickey Mouse or any of these highly iconic things is that they have such ingrained color logic, such ingrained symbolism and shapes that it allows you to actually discard a lot of them because the other ones are so strong. And that's like a good way to try and find what you're going to do interesting with the character. Now, I'm not saying that what I did here is way out in left field, because it certainly isn't. This is very Joker, but that's why Joker gets drawn so much. That's why characters like Joker get drawn so much, is because you can decide, I'm not doing red lips, I'm not doing green hair, but I'm going to do the rest of it, and you're going to get something really cool. You can decide, I'm not going to do the white skin, I'm not going to do a purple suit, but I'm going to keep the red lips and the green hair, and then you can go ham. Every now and then you end up with like Leto's Joker, which is a travesty, but there's so much that you can do, so much opportunity that you can do, that if you're just like an artist having fun, like why not have fun and play with it? If you're going to make a whole movie based on it, do better. But anyways, you can experiment like crazy when you're just kind of doing like a one-off doodle. One thing I want to point out is the buttons on his cuffs. Those are the same single button, that top button, and then the three below it are just duplicates of that first one. The reason why I find it okay to do something like that in an illustration like this and with a character like this is because that suit would be made immaculately, and it would be made with lots of precision, and the idea of those being repetitive is fine. If this were something that were more naturalistic, or maybe something where you were trying to communicate more of a handcrafted thing, more of a handcrafted how do I say this? Handcrafted in a bad way, although not necessarily in a bad way given your taste, but handcrafted in a bad way if you're looking for precision, you wouldn't want to do that. You wouldn't want to duplicate those. Same thing with the buttons on his like torso. The three that are closest to us are all the same button, but then I went over them again just to give them a little bit of slight adjustment. And then the top two buttons on the distant side are the same, and then the one that's around him in the back is different because it's just in a different location. It curves around his body a little bit more. For the gun, I looked up some reference and just tried to make it mostly like an existing gun. There are a couple of little tweaks here or there just to kind of fit what I needed to do. Also, whenever you're highly stylizing something, there's ramifications across the rest of the world that you're designing for. It's kind of like if you were to do like a highly stylized like vinyl toy style Joker, where maybe he would have really big hands and then really big head and a small body. Now everything that character picks up also has to be really big. But what if that character picks up something like a belt? Well, that's got to be small because the waist is small. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're stylizing things, is that you have to consider the ramifications of everything else that's going to be in that world. If you're just doing one illustration, you can get away with a lot. If you're coming up with a look and feel for a property, you actually need to ask yourself, like, if I'm going to do this with the character anatomy, what is the impact to the size of a fork or the size of a car, or etc., etc. So with this, one of the big things that I wanted to do was take the background color and have it be the same color as stuff on Joker, kind of giving it like a limited, almost silkscreen print vibe. That was initially what I was going to do. In fact, I was going to make it all a lot rougher. I was just kind of laying in the flats and then I would start texturing it. But by the time I got to this point, I just said, okay, no, let's do some more rendering. Let's make it a little bit softer, and let's just bring a little more finish to the overall piece. And that's how we end up getting to the look that we end up having. One thing too that I should mention here is that you'll notice in the shading, which is happening right now, you see it on the glove, because I'm going through the layers and doing it in the order of the layers, is I'm using a soft airbrush for basically all the shadows in this. It's just soft airbrush, and then I'm using a soft airbrush to paint as well as a soft airbrush to erase, because when you make that soft airbrush bigger, you can get a softer erase. When you make that airbrush smaller, you can get a sharper erase. Same thing is true with the brush as well. So you can actually get yourself a lot of hard and soft edges with just that brush, actually. So that's what we're doing. Oh, here's where I come up with the pattern for his suit. I just picked a textured brush that was already in Procreate, made this kind of like random check pattern, and then tilted it and put it on. I wanted it to be flat, and that's why it looks like that. So I'm going in, putting all the shadow, but the thing I wanted to point out is that the shadow that we're putting on here, if you pay attention to a lot of my other videos, what we're essentially doing is we're kind of combining a little bit of an AO shadow slash form shadow with a support shadow, and that's just kind of giving us, like, you know, there's a lot of different styles of art out there, right? Sometimes there's just a single shadow layer, sometimes there's multiples, sometimes there's no shadow layer. Instead, you're picking and choosing colors, and you're painting, and you're doing, there's so many ways to skin this cat, right? So the way that we're doing it here is we're just saying, let's keep it simple, because the normal shadow that we would refer to on this channel as like a cast shadow or a hard shadow, we have that in the lines. You can see underneath his jawline and underneath his ear, the space between his teeth where you see inside of his mouth, some other areas across the illustration, there are heavy black shadows that are part of the line. So we don't actually need those cast shadows. We only need the soft shadows. And there's really not a lot of need to do an AO shadow, because we also have a duplicated line shadow that's been slightly blurred, which I believe is turned off right now, but it'll get turned on again later. So sometimes when you take that line layer, duplicate it, blur it a bit, you're, unbeknownst to you, maybe making kind of like an AO pass. Here I wanted to have just like a slight cast shadow across him, just to bring a little bit of emphasis up there and make it a little more interesting. Theoretically, he's walking through some place, there's a light shining down, and it's getting cut off at his head. And at first I had this kind of like green smoke coming out, because I thought that could be really fun, stylish, kind of colored, but then I was like, oh, but then it just looks too much like it's trying to specifically be like a poison gun, and that's not really what I want to go for. So to recap the shadows real fast, because I kind of changed topics there, we have hard shadows put in at the line point, the point of creating the lines. Then we have a duplication of all those lines, slightly blurred, which is supporting a little bit the notion of an AO shadow, although that's not what it is, but that is kind of what we've got going there. It kind of fills in those gaps. And then we've got this overall shadow layer, which is where we are adding some extra dimension, a little bit of form stuff, a little AO, a little directional lighting, and it's all just, it's serving all those purposes with just that one. Now, just to add some extra finish to it, we've got this stylized rim light on the right side of him. It's really sharp, just trying to give some extra form to him as well as pop him out. You can see that at one point I changed the color of the gloves away from the yellow and away from the dark, just to bring it more into his palette, have it be the same as his tie. And then that texture you saw, that was just the dot matrix one from the from Procreate, and then I lowered the opacity on it a ton to put it in the shadows, just to give a little bit of texture in the shadows. Here I'm messing with a bunch of stuff like AO, or excuse me, not AO, chromatic aberration and the glitch filter. Chromatic aberration is on the final image, but the glitch filter is not. Even though it's really fun to play with, I have yet to find a use for it that really works with anything that I've done so far, but I'm sure I'll figure it out eventually. This here is the final version of the image. The idea here was just to do a fairly straightforward, loud colors, loud posing version of Joker. Pretty simple, but pretty fun. This here was the rough sketch with all those little rough sketch layers turned on, and then we'll flip back to the final again just for that. So I hope you enjoyed this video. This was a fairly quick one. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting like or subscribe or share with your friends. All of that stuff really helps, and I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.